Also, as we think about summer, as it has been for me, summer has always made a significant impact in my spiritual life. And I've known that to be true for most individuals, especially youth. If you've grown up with the youth group, I was thankful this morning I received another camp packet. And so another one going to camp. If you have not got that in and had an opportunity, there's probably not a better week for a young person to spend than camp week. In a lot of ways, it's hot, it's nasty, but a week to refresh, to learn about God and such an environment, and it will be a great week. You still have time. If you'll get me those today, they're due tomorrow. There's a late fee after tomorrow, as the bulletin said, but we'd love for you to be thinking about that, praying about that opportunity. It's not too late, though, if you want to go. We'd love for you to go to camp with us. Also, our mission trip. That's going to be another great opportunity, and who knows, only God knows how good that will be for both us and the congregation in Leonard, the good things that we'll have an opportunity to do, and the opportunity our young people have to grow and to learn in that environment. It will be great. So I hope you'll be prayerful and considering those opportunities and thinking about, yes, it'll be busy, but it will be a great being busy for God, being tired in service to Him this summer. At least in my mind, when Paul had always talked about, or when he had talked about preaching, he had always talked about the joy and the pleasure of preaching, at least in my mind. And so I went looking for a verse where he did that. I went looking for a verse and a thing to tell you about the joy of preaching, that how it was such a, I feel that way. It's a great privilege and honor to be able to stand before you and preach the unsearchable riches of Christ. And yet as I went and I looked for that verse and I was looking for that to share with you, I didn't come across it. I'm not saying it's not there. That was a superficial search that I did. But the verses that stuck out to me, though, were places like Romans 1 and verse 15 and 16. He said, I'm a debtor. I'm indebted to preach the gospel of Christ to you. Right, the good news that saves men's souls. I'm in debt. Or places like Ephesians 3 in verse 7. I've got to serve. I'm a servant of God. I'm a slave to preach and to teach people about who Jesus is. I'm burdened, maybe like Habakkuk, with a message that I have to tell you about. And I could tell you, I could appreciate more his sentiments in those verses in light of my study this week on our topic we'll be studying this morning and next Sunday as well. I'm reading from something that Kyle Butt wrote. He says, the dramatic horror of separation from God. How is it possible to describe the spiritual state of being banished from the presence of a supreme being of the universe? Being alienated from Jehovah is the ultimate experience of horror. It's a separation from everything that's pure and good, everything that's right and wholesome, everything that makes for joy and tranquility. It is, however, just like heaven, a spiritual experience. And since the human mind operates on the plane of the material, we really are not prepared to appreciate the gravity of such a circumstance. Hence, God has employed appropriate symbolism to describe the agonies of hell. You've read about them, you at least have them in your mind, and you've heard about them. And when you think about hell, it's not pleasant. And yet, I think the world has gotten a better sense of it than we have. Than Christians, the world has a better sense of the reality of hell than Christians have had. And I'd like to explore that today. There's a conference. Have you heard of Lads to Leaders? Lads to Leaders, a great work that goes on in many congregations, a great work across our brotherhood in which for a weekend it teaches individuals, teaches young people how they can serve God. Many talents, from artists to puppets to song leading to preaching, leadership, how Christians can get involved and serve their God. Older people taking on that mentorship role, passing on 2 Timothy 2 and verse 2, that opportunity. And so I was a little dismayed as I read about that week in one person's comments. They hold it on Easter every year. And the reason they hold it on Easter every year is because nobody fills up the hotels. You can get a good rate on Easter at hotels because nobody's there. And so, in light of that, that's where this conversation happened. And so, or this comment was made. Here's one man's comments. Don't tell me that God doesn't have a sense of humor. Atheist books hotel on Easter weekend thinking all Christians will be in church, only to find the resort full of thousands of Christians. It may be ironic. It may even have been an event in which God orchestrated. It may even be slightly comical. But does the God of heaven really pull strings from his abode to play jokes on people bound for eternal punishment? Did this man really mean to be malicious with his comments? I'm certain that he doesn't. He's a great man. He preaches the gospel all over the world. And perhaps I missed something in his tone and the tenor because he posted it to social media. But even if that is the case, in my mind at least, it highlights a major problem when it comes to the doctrine of hell. Our conversations don't express the reality of what hell is, nor do they create a healthy dialogue of which we can teach people about our God. I want you to notice the two words, and while I think that the world has a better picture and idea of hell than we often do in the church. The first is the words of Penn Jillette, of Penn and Teller fame, and known as an avid atheist and somebody who's certainly against the God of heaven, doesn't believe in him, doesn't think he exists, and he goes about making fun of him often. But it's interesting, pulled out of one of his comments, in which he really is attacking Christians in some ways. He says this about them. American Christians will really believe in the marketplace of ideas. And I love the fact that there are people that talk to me after the show and pray for me, and they give me Bibles. I never understand the atheists that say, it's okay as long as they, Christians, will shut up. They believe, Christians that is, believe that there is eternal life. They believe you can be saved. What could be more hateful than shutting up? Here's some more words that convicted me, or equally humbling, as I often try to skate around the difficult teachings of Jesus. They say, if I firmly believed, as millions say they do, that the knowledge and the practice of Christianity in this life influences the destiny in another world, Christianity would be to me everything. I would cast aside earthly cares as follies, earthly thoughts and feelings as vanity. Christianity would be my first waking thought. It would be my last image before sleep sank me into unconsciousness. I would labor in its cause alone. I would take thought of the morrow and eternity alone. Earthly consequences should never stay my hands or seal my lips. I would esteem one soul gained for heaven worth a lifetime of effort. I would go forth to the world and I would preach Christ in season and out of season. And my text would be, what shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Those are the words of Otis Gatewood penned in his book. As I think about those words, become really convicted, but it reminds me and helps me think about a discussion that Jesus has about hell, and I hope you'll be turning there and thinking about in Luke 15, and you're thinking, wait a minute, I know Luke 15. Luke 15 isn't about the reality of hell, and it isn't about eternal judgment and punishment. That's Luke 16, and you'd be right. But I think one of the things that God is doing, or at least He does do for me as we read through in order, you know, we get to Luke 15 before we get to Luke 16. And I hope you'll notice that how chapter 15 helps us have a God-honoring life and dialogue about hell. And pay special attention, please, to the attitude and the actions He's desperately trying to root out of His people. If we're going to have an honest discussion with people about what this book says, because Luke chapter 16, when you get there, it absolutely talks about our eternal destinies. It talks about the reality of a paradise and an abode for all those who will be found worthy. It talks about a future of heaven. But it also, as real as that is, side by side, it compares the eternal destiny of those who won't be with God. Eternal punishment, a hell. But before he gets there, thank God, he lays out Luke 15. And in my mind, he's rooting out an attitude. And this morning, I hope he's rooting it out of us, of what we need to do and how we need to have a healthy discussion about hell in our churches, in our lives. What you think about for a moment as you open up Luke 15 and see who he's talking about. When all the tax collectors, verse 1, and the sinners drew near to hear him, the Pharisees and the scribes complained, saying, "This man receives sinners and he eats with them." Here's a problem. At least in their mind, these sons of light, the people who from all the beginning of the foundations of the world here, he's placing upon this special people. You're with God. You're in his presence. You have the oracles, the teachings of God. You're his people. And those are the people that they get mad at Jesus when he comes and he sits with people who aren't like them, and he eats with them, and he talks with them, and he's trying to teach them about heaven. And so they become mad. But I want us to focus briefly. We're not going to read through the whole thing just yet. Think about a word that pops up over and over throughout each of these parables, 3 parables in Luke 15. Remember, 3 parables and the rooting out an attitude in which has become adopted by so many in the church. I want you to notice verse 4. "And what man if you, having 100 sheep, if he loses one, doesn't leave the 99 and go after the one? And when he's found it," verse 5. Verse 6, "For I have found my sheep, it was lost." And so you go on in the parable of the lost coin in verse 8. "Having 10 silver coins, if she loses one, doesn't light a lamp and tries to find it. And when she has found it," verse 9 talks about, and then she goes and tells her friends, "I found the piece which I have lost." You move on to the prodigal, the parable of the prodigal son, and you see, as you look through here, some words. And the first time that same word "lost" shows up in this verse is not maybe where you'd expect it, or in this parable. Verse 17. "But when he came to himself," that's the prodigal. We'll look in just a moment. I know that maybe some are confused and not real familiar, but we'll come back. "When he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger?'" Same word. And then you go through a little bit further, and it speaks to verse 24, "For this my son was dead, he's alive again, he was lost, and he's found." And they began to be merry. And then as you go down even further, "For your brother was dead, he's alive again, he was lost, and now he's found." I don't know, it would be good for you, I think, because it was good for me, if you circle every time you see that word "lost." When we're going to look at do you have any titles, subheadings over each of those stories as you read through your Bible in Luke 15? There's something lost in the first story. There's something lost in the second story. There's something lost in the third story. There's 2 somethings lost, but there's a story about one of them that we've come to know. Lost. That was really interesting when I began to see what that word meant. Did you know that that's the same word in verse 17? Lost is in verse 17. He came to his senses. He realized, "I'm lost." It's a compound word. It's a word that from the preposition away and perish, die. I'm dying away. Before we can talk about hell, an attitude needs to leave us, and one word he tries to use to help us see that is this word "lost." You know a child is lost every 40 seconds in the United States. Every 40 seconds. 2,000 children every day, 80,000 a year. It's a staggering statistic from the National Child Safety website, which means that 4,000 new parents wake up every single morning and have no idea where their child is. Parents, can you imagine that? Have they ever slipped out of your sight for just a moment? You've been at the grocery store, mom's, and gone, and you panic. I remember we just had moved to San Saba, and when we got there, we had some friends come over, and next door to our house was a arcade / ping pong, much like our youth room. And so a friend and I, we went over there. And so my wife and her friend are sitting there talking, and the kids, they decided to come over and play. So all the big kids are there, and Gunnar wants to come, so she bundles them up, 3-year-old Gunnar, and sends them out the door. And so they're going to come right behind us, and as they're walking out the door, they notice at the corner, at the intersection of our house, there's a truck. An older blonde-headed woman, she steps out of her truck and she walks around and she opens the door and she places something in the back seat. And then she drives off. April and Denise, they walk out the door and they come over to the place where we're playing ping pong, expecting to have a good time, and she asks, "Where's Gunner?" He never came in here. What? Gunner, he never came in the room, and panic immediately hits her face, and I run outside, stop the ping pong game. And my wife's screaming, "She took him! She took him!" We hop in the car with her friend because she had gotten a picture of who it was, and I drive one way, April's screaming one way, another friend drives the other way, talking to 911 operator, and for a moment, Gunnar had perished away. Have you ever had that feeling? Lost. That's the word he wants us to know and he wants us to think about. And every time that we have a discussion about hell, that's what he's talking about. There is a separation. He's perishing away. But he does something else, and what's so beautiful about chapter 15, that it's right before he gets to chapter 16 where he talks about that, is what God thinks about lost things and what he does about it. What does he do about lost things? Would you read this with me? I know it won't be a burden for those of you who love it, and I hope it's not for those of you who don't know this parable. What does God do and think about lost things? Verse 11, then he said, a certain man had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the portion of goods that falls to me." So he divided to them his livelihood. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and journeyed to a far country. And there he wasted his possessions with prodigal living. But when he had spent all there, and he arose in a severe famine in the land, and he began to be in want. Then he went and he joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into the fields to feed swine. And he would have gladly filled his stomach with pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough to spare, and I perish with hunger? I'm lost, I'm dying away from my father's house. I'll arise and I'll go to my father, and I'll say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants." And he arose and he came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and he had compassion. He ran and he fell on his neck and he kissed him. And the son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father, as he interrupts, says to his servants, "Bring out the best robe, put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. Bring the fatted calf here and kill it. Let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead, he's alive again. He was lost and now he's found." And they began to be merry. And now this older son was in the field, and he came and he drew near to the house, and he heard music and dancing. So he called one of his servants and he asked what these things meant. He said to him, "Your brother's come, and because he has received him safe and sound, your father's killed the fatted calf." But he was angry. He was perishing away, and he's home, and the brother's angry. He would not go in. Therefore his father came out and he pleaded with him. So he answered and he said to his father, "Lo, these many years I've been serving you. I never transgressed your commandment at any time, and yet you never gave me a young goat that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours came, who's devoured your livelihood with harlots, you killed the fatted calf for him." And he said to him, "Son, you're always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was right that we should make merry and be glad, for your brother was dead, he's alive again. He was lost, but now he's found." That's beautiful. And it's powerful, and it's wonderful, but why do we forget it? Perishing away, lost things, and we see a great God. Why were they so mad as that discussion began? Here's Jesus eating with sinners, and what's he say? "No, I've come to seek and save." Luke 19 and verse 10. Isn't it wonderful? The book of Luke in the greater context, as you compare it to the other gospel accounts, is really unveiling for us the humanity of a great God. Right? Those birth narratives that are so commercialized and thought of, and so it opens up from its very beginning, though, talking about God left heaven. He came here for me and for you. As I read this week, Christianity is completely unique from every other world religion in one major way. The Buddhists ring bells. The Hindus worship their ancestors. Muslims prayed towards Mecca. All of them do this in search of God, a never-ending quest for their idea and their view of who God is. Christianity is the only religion where God himself sought man, the God who runs to meet you. I can still remember Dan Winkler preaching Luke 15 in the prodigal son and talking about the Greek terms and in the text when you read, he loved him down. And the tears of a father just tackle his son. You see him coming over the hill and he's running to get him. And that's a picture of our God. And folks, it's before Luke 16. Before you get to eternal punishment, you see the rich man in torment. You see a picture of a God who's searching after the hearts of his people because they're lost and they're perishing away. As we talk more about this attitude that he's trying to root out, would you go to chapter 16, though, before we get to the rich man and Lazarus? We're not getting there today. Don't worry, for time's sake, that's next week. But for today, look before that. Look at this parable. It's the parable of the unjust steward, and I'm not sure if that's ever challenged you, if you've thought about this, but there's a steward. He's unjust. He's not doing what he needs to be doing. He's wasting away his master's goods. And so, right before he's fired, though, he gets word, he gets his pink slip, and what's he do? He goes to his master's creditors, the account holders, and he begins to tell them, hey, he wants to, as is in the text, I like the way it said, see if I could find it. Verse 5, he called every one of his master's debtors to him, and he said to the first, how much do I owe you? That's not it. It's verse 4. I've resolved what to do, that when I'm put out of the stewardship, when I no longer be a steward, they may receive me into their houses. Hey, I want to have a good name. I want to still be able to be successful. I want to still be able to make money. I still want to be able to do the things and have the lifestyle that I've had being your steward. And so he is unjust. He goes and takes what's not his. And yet, there's something odd about this. He's commended for it. Look at verse 8. There's this commendation. The master commended the unjust steward because he had dealt shrewdly. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in their generation than the sons of light. What? He's commended for this awful, this ungodly things that he has done. Yeah. In his generation, among his type of people, in the world in which he lived, he acted exactly how he believed. Did you see that? Because that's what it's about in that world. In the world in which he was, it was about making money. It was about my reputation with people. It was about all those things. And so, true to his thinking, true to his life, true to everything he knew about what life was, he was acting right in line. He was acting wisely. He was acting just like, they're more shrewd than the sons of light. Who are the sons of light? Why aren't they acting wise? Why aren't they doing the things that they're supposed to be doing? Would you go to Matthew 23? In Matthew 23, this opened my eyes. And this week I couldn't get it out of my mind as I thought about what Jesus talks about in Luke 16. And remember, these are the same people, verse 15, he's talking to that he started to talk to in Luke chapter 15, scribes and Pharisees. These are the sons of light. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You travel land and sea to win one proselyte. And when he's won, you make him twice as much a son of hell as you are. And their desire, at least in their mind, honest to who they thought they were. They were trying to build up the kingdom. They were trying to build up the kingdom for God. And what they actually ended up doing was accumulating souls in hell, according to Jesus' own words. They're acting like the other generation. What was it about them? What was the attitude that God was trying to root out? What was he trying to get rid of in their minds? They weren't acting right and true to God's generation. You know, Gunner was safe and sound on our step. As we were calling around, police operator, cops show up. 10 minutes felt like an eternity as your son's perishing away from you. But you know where he was? He was just sitting on the step to my office. Instead of going right out the door and playing ping pong, he thought we went left into my office, and he walked around right on the road, right on this road, and then in front of a busy road. And he goes and he walks just about like this, and then he walks straight up the driveway. And so he's sitting there on the porch step facing the road and just, where is everybody just hanging out? One of our friends drives by, and he just happens to look over, and there's Gunner. As I thought about that this week, and for me at least, it was a parable of my own. I hope it is to you. God rooting out this attitude of what it was. We're so concerned, and we're so worried, and we're going across all the world to teach people to be like us. To teach people to be like us, and yet there seems to be an attitude when we talk about eternities, when we talk about the hereafter, that the only thing we do about it is joke. When was the last time you had a serious conversation with somebody about their soul? That it was perishing away, that it was lost, that it was truly separated from God. What does God do? He searches near and far. He goes throughout the entire world. He left heaven, Paul wrote in Philippians chapter 2. He did not think it equal forever. He gave up his rightful place there so that you don't have to perish away, so that I don't have to forever be apart from God. Lost. Is that your attitude? That older brother had gotten so tied up and so wrapped up in duty, maybe, so wrapped up in something that he misplaced, and he didn't realize the blessing he had. He wasn't thankful anymore. Perhaps he complained about the worship that he had to go do each and every day and week to his God. He didn't realize the blessings that he had. And he didn't realize that there were people perishing away out there that are dying to have what you have. Go out into the highways and byways and pull them in. There's people that want to know about God and his plan that he has for them. Lost people. And what's so great about God and why we need to have this conversation first is because hell is as real as heaven. But God was so ready to save people from that. He sent his son. The love of God. There is no greater love than this, right? That a man lay down his life for others. As you think about that, well, are you concerned about individuals? We'll go land and sea. I can't help but think about all the good works that we do. I can't help but think about how I was more concerned. I've never been as troubled as I was about Gunner being lost for another soul. And I prayed this prayer this week of Mark 9 and verse 24. You remember where that dad is just, he's hurting. His son has got an evil spirit. He's got a demon. He's being abused. He's being hurt. And all he wants is for his son to be healed. And Jesus, if you just believe, if you believe, Mark 9 and verse 24. And his response powerful. And I hope you'll pray this prayer. I hope you'll be more concerned. He says, I believe. But Lord, help my unbelief. Intellectually, I think and I study and I know about heaven and I know about hell. But there's something about my life. Why can't that stay ever present? Why am I more concerned and worried about losing my son physically than I am about the souls of my friends and family perishing away? God help us. He's trying to root out this, what we get so focused on, the here and now and what we're doing. We lose sight of eternity, and the attitude he's trying to get rid of is that older brother. No wonder the world can't stand us talking about hell. You remember that man's comments? If I believed every waking moment of my life, it would have been a life worthwhile if I just saved one. God left heaven to save just one, and maybe there's one here this morning. Maybe there's one here this morning that needs to respond. Isn't it a beautiful picture? Obeying the gospel. One did this week. Joshua, so I don't know if you're here, but proud of Josh and what he did. Obey the gospel. He says we don't have to face the wrath of God if we obey the gospel because it's a picture of what God did. He left heaven, right? He died. He died to self, died to me and what I wanted. He was buried. He raised to walk in newness of life. Yes, confessing Jesus today and every day. I believe you. I want to do it your way. Being baptized, raised to walk in newness of life, following after him. I know there's some that need to do that, but I know there's more here this morning that need to root out the attitude of the older brother. We need to be praying that prayer. God, help my unbelief. Help me think about eternity. If you need to respond this morning, can we encourage each other together? We need to be praying that prayer for the congregation here in West Hill, for the world over. People need to get an authentic view of who God is and what he is before we start teaching to them about hell and talking about. Would we root out that attitude? If we can help you this morning, I hope you'll come so we can pray for you and encourage you as together we stand and as we sing.